Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am Mr. Forest. How you doing this week? I'm just getting back into town. I was out in the fair state of Oregon, where I grew up visiting my family. Rod and I went out there to, that was the reason, as this whole COVID thing's been going on. It's been a long delayed trip. I have made it out there, but this was the first time we're like, hey, let's all sit down and have dinner in the house and enjoy each other's company with the nieces and the nephews and the sister and everybody. And that was nice. And we got to stop in Portland, and we also stopped on the coast, the Oregon coast, because, when you're living in the mountain states, I feel like you need to make that regular pilgrimage out to the water. It's just sort of, especially when you grow up on a state that is part of the ocean like that, it feels like some kind of homage that needs to be done. But before I get into that, this week I am going to share with you an AMA that I did as part of the council that we do over on Patreon. So on Patreon, this is back in April, sometimes I ask them, hey guys, what do you want to get into? What do you want to chat about? And I'll do like some private AMAs for them. And this is part of that AMA that I recorded just for the council. And I thought I'd share it with you this week because maybe you want to join the East Forest Council on Patreon, which would be patreon.com/eastforest. We have a monthly council, which is like a Zoom council we do for a particular tier. And then there's also just lower tiers where I share advances of music, like I shared the songs from the Possible album in advance, or unreleased stuff, or things like this, or meditations, kind of whatever. I mean, just kind of, we're making it up as we go along, but it's a way to, for me, not to be so precious about things that I share, in the sense that when you share things as part of your catalog, it's a big deal, and it takes a lot of work and time, and this could be more like, hey, I had this cool, I recorded this interesting, it was an improvisation, a little song, when I was hiking in this canyon, just with a rattle, and I was singing, and I shared that with them, because I thought, why not? We're all family here. We're all in the council. So that's what this is, and it just kind of dives right into it, so you'll hear that. And again, if you want to see if it's a way to support the podcast in general, that's sort of why I did it, and it's a way to support the whole East Forest project. So if you'd like to get involved or have any support, go check it out, patreon.com/eastforest. So back to I want to give you a little story about something that came up when we were traveling before we get into that AMA. We went out to Portland, Rod and I grew up in Oregon, in Salem, and then I lived in Portland for 7 or 8 years as well after my stint in New York City. And I was really struck by where Portland is at right now. It's grungier, it's grimier, more graffiti, the houselessness situation, it's intense. I mean, there are tents everywhere. And I know this is probably a problem that's going on most large cities on the West Coast, but it was just very pronounced for me to see the drastic change that has occurred from just a few years ago to now. And downtown, of course, has been going through, they had 100 straight nights of protest down there, and other parts of the city experienced some protesting as well. So it was kind of rough down there. There weren't even a lot of people downtown. We rode some bikes around. It was beautiful weather. We were cruising around, and we were just kind of like, where are the cars? Where are the people? When we went to other parts, more on the east side, I suppose it was a little more as normal, so to speak. But still, it felt like Portland a little bit in the 80s, as I vaguely remember as a child, when it was rougher. And I know everything goes through cycles and so forth, but just want to send my heart to everybody there and everyone who's going through that transition. It feels like it's sort of the caldera of something larger emerging that's really all across the world, and all across our country. But certain spots are kind of like hot spots where things are getting kicked to the surface, visibly and invisibly, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing, but it's also a hard thing. So was in my fair city, Portland, and we went out to the coast and had this really wonderful time. We're out in Seaside, and we wanted to take a hike one day, and we went down to Oswald West state park. Of course, because clearly it's the state park that is in my family lineage that we own. If you don't hear the sarcasm there, you need to take some lessons on sarcasm. But seriously, it's a beautiful, beautiful park. This beautiful wooded old growth forest out into the ocean. And it was a gorgeous day, and we hiked out to Cape Falcon. And right out of the gate, you're right up against these incredible old growth trees, 20, 30 foot diameter trees. I think they're Sitka spruce out there. Just like it, man, just bam, hits you in the face of like time and groundedness and health and magnanimous. It's powerful. And there's many of these. So we're hiking through the old growth, and it's sunny, which is practically a miracle on the Oregon coast. And there's people out. This is midweek, but having this beautiful hike, and we were chatting, and started thinking about I've been thinking about some anxiety that I've been feeling over the past 2 years, year and a half, I guess. I've dealt with anxiety and depression in my life, sadly, since I was a little boy. At different times, it's come up sort of like in big waves. And I'm always trying to understand it and pick it apart. But the last year, it's been more anxiety than depression. And I felt really creatively engaged, but I think it had a lot to do with the pandemic, of course. Anyway, I've been going through doing some personal work on this, and just really diving in, trying to find the kernel of it. And one of the things that came up for me was this analogy of a slinky. And you take a slinky, right, on each end of your hands, and you stretch it out so the slinky is stretched out in front of you. And you basically have this big spiral, right, moving across space there. And it's wonderful to remember that we often look at our solar system in a two-dimensional way. That's how most drawings are. And you see the sun, and, you see the planets, and Mercury, and Mars, and Earth, and Venus. I hope I'm getting that right. You know what I mean? And you see it like that. But, of course, in a three-dimensional sense, it's not on a flat plane like that. But moreover, the sun itself is moving through space and time as we're moving around the sun, and the whole solar system is moving inside the arm of the galaxy, and that flocculent arm of our Milky Way galaxy is rotating around this giant black hole, and then the entire Milky Way galaxy is moving through space. So you see where this is going. We're moving in a spiral fashion, just around our sun, for instance, as we're moving in this vector forward through space and time. So if you think about that three-dimensionally, we're never in the same place twice. We're always spiraling through time, okay, quite literally. That being said, I started to take this metaphor and think about time itself, and that like a spiral in a fractal sense, if you were to pick a point on it, think about the East Forest logo, right, which is sort of it's a nautilus, a spiral. And if you imagine that the spiral swirly cues right there into the center, and you pick a point and you zoom into that point, anything that goes smaller than that or larger than that is relative to that point. And if you were to jump then down to an even smaller point and you zoom down into there, the same thing. You look down, it's now relative smaller in the same ratio, and you look the other way to its expansion, and it's the same as where you were before. It's always relative to where you are. And in that sense, time is relative to where you are. It's always just a different sort of physical place, always in the now. But what I'm getting at is I started to think about success or achievement. Let's say achievement, like getting things done. Things you make and build. And I'm thinking about this because of my own attachment to my sense of self-worth and getting things done. I'm really putting it out there now. But I thought to myself, well, it's always relative. we can always say the grass is always greener and that, but it's always browner too if you look the other way. And no matter where you're at on your sense of achievement, there will always be a relative more and a relative less. Always. I knew this before, but there's something about seeing these old trees and sensing the time and this walk that I've been doing the past few weeks and months as I'm walking with this idea of like, what is attached to my anxiety? How is it attached to my sense of I should be getting more done, or I want to be getting more done, or I want some certain things to be accomplished, or things that are not accomplished, right? More likely. And a recognition that even if I were to accomplish those or not, there will always be more, there'll always be less. Now, this is not a heavy-duty realization here. I'm not exactly rewriting the rules of the human experience, but I'm just sharing this with you because maybe like the visual of that slinky and the spiral and or the visual and the poetry of those trees, I'm sure you can imagine them, and sharing my own story of how that's something that I struggle with in my human experience. Maybe something in there resonates for you and it's something you can take or not take, and I'll just leave it at that. But, and another recognition for myself, like it's never an arrival at a destination. So even the sense of that I would assuage all of my anxiety is not a realistic aspiration. That in itself is a kind of desire that creates, like I'm spinning in place, like going around a flocculent arm. Regardless, I'm moving through space and time in this spiral fashion, and I will always be relative to where I am, always. So in that sense, I don't have to tread water. I don't have to run in place. And there's a kind of acceptance there that's wanting to happen. And maybe that sums it up right there. That is the human experience, at least for myself, is drinking in the gifts of what is while continuing forward with the challenges and trials and tribulations and celebrations and joys, recognizing them for what they are and just that, what they are. I don't know. I can't always understand it. So before we get into this AMA, I just want to say thank you for listening and subscribing, for reviewing. You can review more than once. Thank you for doing that on Apple Podcasts. The 5 stars really helps. While we're talking, you can do that if you go to the show page. And for sharing the podcast and anything about the project. And the new Possible album is out, so sharing those songs. We did do a signed vinyl giveaway, and we're going to do that again this week. You can join right now. It's real easy. Just make a post of any kind. Tag us with the hashtag What's Possible. It'd be great if you could include a song from the record with that little feature where you can include music. Tag East Forest too. And just tell us what you're dreaming up. What's your dream for the future? What do you want to be possible in this world for yourself or for the community at large, for the whole planet? Planting that seed, that element of your choice, even making that small post and pondering that question is important and powerful. So we're asking people to make these sorts of posts. You can do it as many times as you like, different ones. And we will announce on Thursdays, at least this week, probably another week or two, on IG Live, and we'll tag you so you know. And we will gift away another signed vinyl of the Possible album, which you can buy anyway if you like. To support, over at eastforest.org and just click on the shop link. Okay, well, so let's get into this. Again, this is an AMA from the East Forest Council on Patreon. And thank you so much for listening. We'll have most likely, very likely, we'll get back into the conversations next week. But for now, here's more of me doing the AMA. Let's see, Derek and William, you both had sort of similar things. One was sort of how do we have psychedelics integrate more into the world? And I'd presume you mean for the betterment and change and transition of the world. And also psychedelics for mental health and sort of questions around that. And I'll start with that. Um, you know, I think we found a couple different factors on why psychedelics may be helpful sometimes for people to heal themselves on an emotional level. And more research will absolutely be done and has been done just a little bit, but I think we're going to find that there's probably, and this is just like my own assumptions, some chemical benefits of actually like whether it's there's less inflammation in the brain or it's creating some new neural pathways or whatever it is with serotonin or dopamine, that there are lasting effects of just on that level that help you feel perhaps better. Now, this has been shown a bit with ketamine, and there are some studies on that for treatment-resistant depression that I understand is very helpful for some people. And then I have my own firsthand experience more recently with ketamine because Rada, my partner, is a ketamine therapist. And I've gone through 2 series of sessions with them. And just what I've learned from that and from her is that a lot of times with ketamine in particular, some people do find a benefit of lowering anxiety, helping with depression, even chronic pain. And for myself, I absolutely found it lowering anxiety. And I tend to notice it after about the second time. And so she would have a series of sessions, let's say between 3 and 5 or 6 across up to 3 weeks. So you might be doing it twice a week or at least once a week. And there seems to be some evidence, as I understand it, that sort of regularity and building upon itself plays a part in these mental health benefits. So after the first time, I didn't notice a huge change. After the second time, I would notice that next week, like a lessening of my attachment to certain anxiety. And the third week, even more. And the fourth week, it's really undeniable for myself. Not everybody feels that, but that's just an example of in a particular thing with mental health. It can help. Now, there's the other aspect of it that is not just chemical. And by the way, similar things have been anecdotally discovered for people for a long time with psilocybin in a similar way. Maybe not that they need to do it multiple times, but after one medium dose to significant dose, they had I knew someone in Portland who needed to do a journey like that at least every 6 months for depression, just like strictly because they would feel that was like the medicine that actually just helped them overcome falling into deep depressions. Now, part of this could be the psycho-spiritual element. I think it's a huge part too of the ketamine work, in my opinion, because, and this is why ceremony and ritual are a big part of this work that I feel is often, well, it's not given some kind of the weight I think it deserves, and music plays a big part in that. Because when you dive in really eyes wide open and with intention and sort of asking to dive into the soul, you can have these really powerful experiences of psychological work, of going into old traumas or seeing a bird's eye perspective on your life and what's important to you. And this kind of work seems to be deeply satisfying and meaningful to the psyche, to the heart. And let's just call it soul work. You combine this then with any sort of chemical benefits. It's kind of hard to say like which is doing which, but it clearly seems that it's not as simple just taking a pill and going about your life like you might with a typical antidepressant. It's like, no, the actual ceremony and the work itself is a major component into what makes the mental health benefit work. Kind of that giving yourself over to a larger process, creating that structure and ritual and reverence, a kind of humbleness stepping into that, I think is probably also a big part of it too, which many psychedelic journeys, there's always, this element of fear and humbleness because you're like, I'm not fully in control and I'm giving myself over to a larger energy so that I can be helped, kind of asking for help in that way. So, I really hope, and like one of the things I've been advocating for and trying to do with various companies or people or whoever reaches out, and they're kind of like poking around about like music to help them out with their psychedelic venture, Yeah, I really try to go even bigger than just, oh, you play this song, or often for people it's playlists. It's sort of, and that's just gonna do it. It's like, well, I think it's a more holistic picture, and the music is couched inside the ceremony itself. It becomes the ceremony, and so it's hard to separate the two. To just say, well, here's the music, you don't need the rest of it, and I think they kind of go hand in hand. So thanks, Derek and William. And as far as integrating it into the world, I'm more the believer, like the best evidence you can give to anyone or argument about the efficacy of psychedelics or even how they've worked for you, excuse me, is how you live your life. You don't need to say anything or convince anyone. I think if things are going well for you and you have a balanced and loving life, and you feel directed and calm, and you have an open heart, everyone's going to want to know what Kool-Aid you're drinking. I guarantee it. And so it's sort of like the Tao in the Tao Te Ching, the notion that those who know the truth do not speak the truth because the truth cannot be spoken. There's really nothing to say. And this isn't even something you have to try to do. This isn't like clothing you put on to convince people. It's really like, as you start going down the path, more and more it's about stripping away the need to prove or the need to cajole or convince. And in turn, the convincing is happening just because of what is. It's sort of not anything folks can argue with. Okay, thanks so much for that answer and question. We had a question from Rob about music and ceremony and what kind of things you can use in the toolkit and so forth. And yes, you admit this is a big question. It is sort of a big question, but we'll drop a few things here. Thanks for the compliment on the vocalizations. You're kind of asking that's something that feels like it sort of cuts through and creates a really emotional response for you. And it does for me too. And I can see why it does. And here's what's going on there. Probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I was doing some ceremonies and I just started exploring more with singing and vocalizations. And I didn't want to use as much lyrics. I used to sometimes come up with little phrases, sort of like in Crystal Starship, there's All Is Love, or on Grounded, or on Music to Die To, Music to Be Born To. There's some phrases like just the word inside, and I like all that. But I was moving into this phase where I was like, I don't want to even engage the language centers of the brain when we're on these journeys, to kind of keep it in that fluid, gooey, warm, emotional place that music is so good at playing around in. So, but I wanted to sing because the human voice is it's like a snowflake. It really is a transmission of your soul. And everyone's is unique. They're full of overtones, and overtones often being like the real juju in sound healing, quote unquote. So I've always was trying to encourage myself to sing more, but also I was feeling self-conscious about it and just trying to find my way with it in a way that I felt confident in. And that was just an experiment that I was playing around with at the time in the ceremony. And frankly, it's just kind of stuck and expanded. And, it's one of those things you look back over the years and you're like, oh, I still do that. It's been a while. But I noticed it freed me up to not have to be singing a lot of consonants, which can break up the flow. Like when you sing just lyrics and words, it's harder, because the open vowels are sort of in a way more just that. They're open and more easy to sing. So I think if that's something you feel confident in, sort of gentle vocalizations, if you're good at it and it feels good, can be an interesting thing to use in a journey because it's coming from the heart. But that being said, that's what's really key. No matter what you're doing, no matter what you're playing, it has to come from the heart. And what I mean is, it shouldn't really be an intellectual exercise about this tone is supposed to be played at this time. When you're in the psychedelic space, it cuts through all the bullshit. And the radar of like, is something true or not is very clear for people. And if you're singing from the heart, that's all that matters. Way more than the quality or the performance or the skill that you're putting that out there. I mean, I still can't play piano that well compared to, piano players, quote unquote. I do what I can do, but the simplicity, I try to use it as a strength to keep the music not too cluttered and simple. It makes it, there's more doorways in. So maybe that's another thing you might want to think about is simplicity, minimalism, always going to be a better approach, always. Spaciousness. If things get too cluttered and congested, you can do that in moments. Absolutely, it can be useful to have this tug and pull, tension and release that slowly is building and releasing as a way of keeping a momentum in the journey. But all in all, you're going to find the magic is in the space, really in what you don't play. And speaking of not playing, having time and moments where you are not playing is really useful too. Think of it as the inhale and the exhale. You need to have times of rest, and that can be within the music, but also between pieces. And it might feel a lot longer than you think it should, but in that space, it's incredibly valuable time of really like integration. And in that music, I often try to create an emotional state that is not fully, let's call it happy, and also not fully what we call sad traditionally. It's in this middle ground, the liminal space where, you can do this like by not playing the third, for instance. So it's maybe more of a modal approach in what you're playing. And so it's not totally defined with a minor third or a major third. And then we don't really know what emotional state that's in. And it creates this, I'm always chasing or often a feeling of hopefulness. If there's mournfulness in the sound, it's also still, there's a tinge of hopefulness as well. And that's where it's kind of existing in that fertile ground in that middle space. And that is a matter of taste and what that means to you. But that's something I find to be deeply emotional, but not saccharine. And that's something that my radar is up on all the time. Yeah, and that's just my own taste. I want it to be emotional, but not sentimental. Because then in my book, it just sort of sounds what I think to be like bad new age music or generic kind of spa music. And that's just all stuff that's just sort of touching it right on the nose as opposed to painting a metaphor around it. The metaphor is always more interesting. It's less direct. And that's what the psychedelic space is. So, when I've played live in those spaces and I'm improvising, I'm following my intuition of excitement. If I feel like, just based on what I'm feeling of the energy in the room, that it needs to get a little thicker and deeper, I'll go that way. And if I feel like someone there really needs something uplifting, I might go in that direction. But it's really just following that intuitive hit of what is exciting to you, that's where the messages come from. Those are the messages. That is the antenna you're putting up, and that's how it's translated into you through how you feel. And you can follow that through, you put it through the heart, meaning not through the head. And that's the direction I think you want to go. Let's see, anything else? I mean, being familiar with the medicine that you want to make music for, I think is incredibly valuable. And testing out your music with yourself and close other friends and just testing, like, which, observing any commonalities, or is this working for people? Is this not? What is working? What is not? But having things be taking their time, being slow, being connected. I connect the dots with field recordings that I record. There's a whole other thing I could go into, certainly with psilocybin, and how that is also very calming and pleasing. And I think beautiful. I love the sounds of wilderness. But yeah, I'm just going to leave it there for now. We could always get more into that, but thank you, Rob. Next question is from Let's do Deuce or Dust. Sorry if I don't know which one it is. You were asking about Possible and the album that's rolling out. And the first song, the title song, Possible, is out. I just thank you for listening and just tell you a little bit about like the album in general. I just want to say conceptually, some of it was recorded before the pandemic, like little piano songs, and some of it, a lot of it was recorded and certainly mixed during the pandemic that we're still in, but the thick of it, the lockdown. And I've just been thinking a lot about this notion that there's always infinite possibilities in front of us. And it's like that, just the truth of that, like that's always the case. And what role our choice plays and what direction we move in and what manifests in front of us and that conversation we're in with the unfolding, the invitation. And in that way, the question becomes what's possible. And I think you might have seen, if you haven't, I put up a video on social media asking that question, what's possible? What do you want to dream into existence? And I encourage you to share that on socials, just a little video, or you could do a meme or an image of just like what you want to choose for the future, in a sense. And we made a hashtag what's possible. But that's like what that song Possible is all about the things that are collapsing around us or not needed anymore, or that we're outgrowing or choosing to let go of, and listening to the opening in front of us, the sounds, the ground, and letting go so that something new can be born. There's that refrain about could you let go? And that's what it means for me, is this exploration for myself and for all of us. It's sort of like, can we let go? And what can we let go of? Can we loosen the grip on this past that we're, naturally holding on to really tightly, that's changing? And it's going to continue changing and get harder and harder to hold on to over time. Like the longer time goes on, the more painful it is to hold on. It just as you see in psychedelic journeys, right? Like if something starts to come up, not giving into that or moving forward into it is the pain itself. That's when things can get real tough. So that's what I'm exploring in the song and in the album overall. Possible is one of the few songs on the record with lyrics. So don't worry for you folks out there that are like, oh, is it all turning into pop or something? And not that anything's wrong with pop. There's solo piano tracks. There's piano and strings. There's songs with some spoken word. There's one other with choruses like this. There's quite a variety. It's definitely more in the contemporary classical zone versus electronic. I don't think there's very few electronic sounds or drum programming on it, just a tiny bit. Last question from Dakota. You're asking about permaculture and talking about that. And I have a few thoughts in this. I'm not an expert, but I've been in these circles and have lots of friends. And so I feel like I've picked up on a lot of it. And in southern Utah, in Boulder, down there in our community, it's a big part of planning and people's landscapes. And so in that sense, it's about, a connective tissue of uses and also being more tapped into like the seasons and the weather and the natural world around us as harmony. And what I think is great about that is that it creates a kind of reminder to ourselves of what we are and what is, and our connection, our lack of separateness to the natural world that is us too. And so by creating, it's sort of like you can think about permaculture as a concept for your entire life, not just how you design landscapes, just sort of like how you are connected and how you can create a life that's sort of like flowing water, and how that water moves and flows, and the swales you might create, and the catchment, and the multiple uses that are reciprocal and symbiotic. It's a beautiful way just to think about life. And certainly when you put it into practice in a physical form on some land, it's a beautiful way to live, and it's something that I think about a lot. So, yeah. I mean, you could get into these cool ideas about like permaculture and music, and it gets kind of conceptual. I like that kind of ideas too. But thanks, guys. Thanks for that's all the questions that I have time for right now. But we'll keep doing things like this. And I want to thank everybody for being a part of the East Forest Council again. And thank you for your direct support. And we shall keep walking our walk. Peace and love. Well, there it is. Thank you so much again for listening. And thanks to everyone who's on that East Forest Council on Patreon. Check it out. It's a way to support this podcast and the project in general. Patreon.com/EastForest. See if it's for you. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Could, and it is from the Possible album. Features string arrangements by Lorna Doone and the strings of the 208 Ensemble. The whole record is out now, wherever you listen to music. So thank you so much for listening and for ordering vinyl and merch, whatever else you feel inclined to do, but just sharing it. And please join the signed vinyl giveaway by making a post on social media with the hashtag What's Possible and tagging us. And we'll be giving away another signed vinyl on Instagram Live this week on Thursday. All right, friends, this coming week, I'm sure I'll be back to the conversations here on the podcast. So thank you so much for listening. You keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. But if you do, do it with grace.